Have you ever wondered why no matter how many self-help books you read, no matter how many motivational videos you watch, no matter how many times you promise yourself that tomorrow will be different, you still find yourself trapped in the same cycles of procrastination, distraction, and inner chaos? The answer lies not in forcing yourself harder or finding more willpower, but in understanding something the ancient Taoist masters discovered thousands of years ago about the true nature of discipline and human behavior. Most of us have been taught that discipline is about forcing ourselves to do things we do not want to do, about grinding through resistance, about powering through with sheer willpower. We imagine disciplined people as those who wake up at 5 in the morning because they have to, who work out even when they hate it, who study for hours through pure determination. But what if everything we have been taught about discipline is not just wrong, but actually the very thing that prevents us from ever developing real, lasting discipline? What if the harder we try to force discipline, the more it slips away from us, like water through our fingers? This is where Taoism offers us a completely different understanding. One that might seem counterintuitive at first, but holds the key to effortless action and natural discipline. The Tao Te Ching speaks of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action, and this principle reveals why our Western approach to discipline fails so consistently. Wu Wei does not mean being lazy or passive, but rather acting in harmony with natural forces instead of fighting against them. When we try to force discipline through willpower alone, we are swimming upstream against the current of our own nature. Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you had to discipline yourself to do something you genuinely loved? When was the last time you had to force yourself to spend time with someone who brought you joy? Or to eat your favorite meal? Or to engage in an activity that filled you with energy and excitement? The answer is probably never, because when we are aligned with our natural inclinations and deeper purposes, discipline becomes unnecessary. The action flows naturally from who we are, not from who we think we should be. The ancient Taoist sage Zhuangzi tells the story of a butcher who could carve an entire ox without ever dulling his blade. When asked about his technique, the butcher explains that he does not fight against the ox or force his way through bone and sinew. Instead, he follows the natural structure of the animal, finding the spaces between joints, working with the natural pathways that already exist. His blade never encounters resistance because he never works against the natural order. This is the essence of Taoist discipline. It is not about forcing your way through life, but about finding the natural pathways that lead to your desired outcomes. Our modern culture has convinced us that anything worthwhile must be difficult, that growth requires suffering, that discipline means doing what we hate in service of future rewards. But this approach creates a fundamental split within ourselves. Part of us wants to grow and improve, while another part resists the harsh methods we use to try to change. We become like a house divided against itself, fighting an endless internal war that drains our energy and sabotages our efforts. 1. Understanding that resistance is information, not obstruction. In Taoist philosophy, everything in nature flows according to certain patterns and rhythms. A river does not force its way through rock by pure determination. Instead, it finds the path of least resistance, gradually carving through the landscape by following the natural contours of the earth. Yet over time, this gentle persistence can carve the Grand Canyon. When we encounter resistance in our efforts to be disciplined, our first instinct is usually to push harder, to apply more force, to find more willpower. But Taoism teaches us that resistance is actually valuable information about misalignment between our approach and our natural way of being. When you feel resistance to a habit you are trying to build, instead of immediately trying to overcome it with force, pause and examine what the resistance is telling you. Are you trying to wake up early because you genuinely want to have peaceful morning time, or because you think you should? Are you exercising because it brings you vitality and joy, or because you feel guilty about your body? Are you eating healthy because it makes you feel energetic and clear, or because you are punishing yourself for past choices? The resistance often points to places where we are acting from external expectations rather than internal alignment. This does not mean we should always take the easy path or avoid challenging ourselves. Rather, it means we should distinguish between the resistance that comes from misalignment and the resistance that comes from growth. Growth resistance feels different. It has an edge of excitement mixed with the fear. It feels like stepping into a bigger version of yourself rather than forcing yourself to be someone you are not. Misalignment resistance feels heavy, draining, like you are constantly swimming against your own current. 2. Cultivating what Taoists call Ziren, or natural spontaneity. This principle suggests that the highest form of action arises not from forced intention but from our authentic nature, expressing itself freely. Most discipline problems actually stem from a disconnection from our authentic desires and natural rhythms. We try to impose artificial structures on ourselves without first understanding our own internal landscape. Consider how differently you approach tasks throughout different times of the day, different seasons, different phases of your life. Some people are naturally more focused in the morning, others late at night. Some people work better in short bursts of intense activity, others prefer long, steady sessions. Some people are motivated by progress and achievement, others by connection and meaning. When we ignore these natural patterns and try to force ourselves into one-size-fits-all approaches to discipline, we create unnecessary friction. The Taoist approach suggests that instead of trying to discipline yourself into an artificial schedule or way of being, you first spend time observing and understanding your natural rhythms and inclinations. What time of day do you feel most mentally clear? What type of environment helps you focus? What kinds of rewards actually motivate you? What deeper values and purposes give your life meaning? When you align your disciplined practices with these natural patterns, the need for willpower dramatically decreases. This also means being honest about what you actually want versus what you think you should want. Often, our discipline problems are not really about lack of willpower, but about trying to force ourselves toward goals that do not actually resonate with our deeper selves. When you connect with what you genuinely care about, when you align your actions with your authentic values and purposes, discipline becomes less about forcing yourself and more about removing obstacles to natural expression. 3. Practicing the Taoist concept of yin and yang in relation to effort and rest. One of the biggest mistakes people make with discipline is thinking it requires constant effort, constant pushing, constant doing. This completely ignores the natural rhythm of expansion and contraction, effort and rest, that governs all of life. Even the most disciplined people in the world do not maintain the same level of intensity every moment of every day. They understand that sustainable discipline requires honoring both the active and receptive aspects of their nature. In Taoist thinking, yin and yang are not opposites that fight against each other, but complementary forces that support and create each other. Rest is not the enemy of productivity. It is what makes productivity sustainable. Reflection is not the opposite of action. It is what makes action effective. Flexibility is not the opposite of discipline. It is what makes discipline adaptable and lasting. When we try to be disciplined by maintaining constant yang energy, constant pushing and doing, we eventually burn out and swing to the opposite extreme of complete inaction. The wise approach is to build rhythm into your discipline practices. Plan for periods of intense focus followed by periods of rest and integration. Honor your need for downtime without guilt. Recognize that sometimes the most disciplined thing you can do is to rest, to reflect, to step back and gain perspective. This prevents the all-or-nothing mentality that destroys so many people's attempts at building lasting habits and practices. Before we continue exploring these principles, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something important. If you are watching this video, you have probably struggled with discipline for a while. You have probably tried many different approaches and felt frustrated when they did not work. You have probably criticized yourself for lacking willpower or consistency. But here is what I want you to understand. Your struggles with discipline are not a character flaw or a sign of weakness. They are often a sign that you are trying to force yourself into approaches that do not align with your nature. Comment below with the words, "I am ready to flow," if this resonates with you and you are willing to explore a different approach to discipline, one based on alignment rather than force. Your comment might be exactly what someone else needs to see to know they are not alone in this struggle. 4. Embracing what Lao Tzu called the power of emptiness. This might be the most counterintuitive aspect of Taoist discipline, but also the most transformative. The Tao Te Ching repeatedly points to the power of emptiness, of space, of what appears to be nothing. The usefulness of a cup lies not in the clay, but in the empty space that can hold water. The usefulness of a house lies not in the walls, but in the empty space where people can live. The usefulness of discipline lies not in the actions themselves, but in the spaciousness and freedom they create in your life. Most people approach discipline as adding more things to their life. More habits, more routines, more requirements, more structure. But Taoist discipline is often more about subtraction than addition. It is about removing the obstacles to natural action, removing the internal conflicts that drain your energy, removing the artificial complexities that create friction in your life. Sometimes the most disciplined thing you can do is to stop doing things that do not serve you, to say no to commitments that drain your energy, to simplify your life so that your natural vitality can flow more freely. This also applies to mental and emotional discipline. Instead of trying to control your thoughts and emotions through force, Taoist practice involves creating space around them, observing them without immediately reacting, allowing them to flow through you without getting caught in them. This creates a kind of inner spaciousness that makes it much easier to choose your responses, rather than being driven by automatic reactions. 5. Understanding the Taoist principle of Te, which is often translated as virtue, but really means the power that comes from acting in accordance with your true nature. In Western culture, we often think of discipline as acting against our nature, overriding our impulses, forcing ourselves to do what we do not want to do. But Taoist discipline is about discovering and expressing the power that is already within you, the natural capacity for focused action that emerges when you are aligned with your authentic self. This requires a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of seeing yourself as lazy or undisciplined by nature, you begin to recognize that every human being has an innate capacity for sustained, focused action when that action is aligned with their deeper purposes and natural way of being. The problem is not that you lack discipline, but that you have been trying to apply discipline in ways that work against your nature rather than with it. Think about activities in your life where you naturally show tremendous discipline without effort. Maybe you are incredibly consistent in how you care for someone you love. Maybe you never miss your favorite television show. Maybe you always find time for activities that bring you joy or meaning. In these areas, you do not need to force yourself because the action flows naturally from who you are and what you value. The goal is to extend this natural discipline to other areas of your life by connecting them to your deeper values and purposes. 6. Applying the Taoist understanding of timing and natural cycles. One of the most profound aspects of Taoist wisdom is the recognition that everything in nature moves according to natural rhythms and cycles. Trying to force action at the wrong time in the wrong season against the natural flow of circumstances creates enormous resistance and wastes tremendous energy. Wise discipline involves learning to read these natural cycles and aligning your efforts with them rather than fighting against them. This applies on multiple levels. There are daily cycles where your energy and focus naturally peak and decline. There are weekly cycles where certain days feel more conducive to certain types of activities. There are seasonal cycles where different qualities of energy are naturally available. There are also personal cycles based on your own life circumstances, stress levels, health, relationships, and overall life situation. Learning to work with these cycles rather than against them can dramatically reduce the effort required to maintain disciplined practices. 7. Cultivating what Taoists call pu, which is often translated as the uncarved block. This represents a state of natural simplicity and authenticity, free from artificial complications and external conditioning. Most discipline problems are actually problems of overcomplication. We have been taught to believe that effective discipline requires elaborate systems, detailed plans, complex tracking mechanisms, and sophisticated strategies. But Taoist discipline tends toward elegant simplicity. The uncarved block represents your natural state before it has been shaped by external expectations and artificial requirements. In this state, your actions flow naturally from your authentic desires and values rather than from complex systems of shoulds and musts. This does not mean being naive or unprepared, but rather approaching discipline from a place of simplicity and authenticity, rather than complexity and artificiality. 8. Embracing the Taoist concept of soft power, which achieves results through gentleness and persistence rather than force and aggression. Water is often used as a metaphor in Taoist teachings because it demonstrates how softness can overcome hardness, how persistence can achieve what force cannot. Water does not fight the obstacles in its path, but it also does not stop flowing. It finds ways around, under, or through obstacles, gradually shaping the landscape through gentle but persistent action. This approach to discipline means being gentle but persistent with yourself. Instead of using harsh self-criticism when you miss a day of your new habit, you gently redirect yourself back to the practice. Instead of trying to force dramatic changes overnight, you make small, consistent adjustments over time. Instead of fighting against your resistance, you work with it, finding creative ways to make the practice more appealing or accessible. The ancient Taoist masters understood something that our modern culture often forgets. True discipline is not about forcing yourself to be someone you are not, but about removing the obstacles that prevent your authentic nature from expressing itself freely and effectively. When you align your actions with your natural rhythms, your deeper purposes, and the fundamental principles of how life works, discipline stops being a struggle and becomes a natural expression of who you are. This does not mean that building new habits or changing old patterns will always be easy. Growth often involves moving through discomfort and uncertainty. But there is a fundamental difference between the discomfort that comes from authentic growth and the suffering that comes from fighting against your own nature. Learning to distinguish between these two kinds of challenge is essential for developing sustainable discipline. The journey of developing Taoist-inspired discipline is ultimately a journey of coming home to yourself, of learning to trust your own inner wisdom, of discovering the power that emerges when you stop fighting against yourself and start working with the natural forces within you. It requires patience because this kind of deep alignment cannot be forced or rushed. It requires self-compassion because learning to work with your nature instead of against it often means unlearning patterns of self-criticism and force that may be deeply ingrained. It requires trust because following your authentic path often looks different from what others expect or recommend. But when you begin to experience what it feels like to take action from a place of alignment rather than force, when you discover the natural motivation and energy that emerge when you connect with what you genuinely care about, when you learn to work with your natural rhythms instead of against them, you will understand why the ancient Taoists spoke of Wu Wei as the highest form of action. You will discover that the discipline you have been seeking was always available to you, not as something you need to force upon yourself, but as something you can allow to emerge naturally when you create the right conditions. If this exploration of Taoist principles has offered you a new way of understanding discipline and personal development, if you feel inspired to explore what it might look like to build habits and routines from a place of alignment rather than force, I invite you to join our community by subscribing to this channel. Here, we dive deep into ancient wisdom traditions and explore how their insights can transform the way we approach modern challenges like productivity, relationships, health, and personal growth. You do not have to figure this out alone. There are others on this path who understand the struggle of trying to force discipline and the relief of discovering a more natural way. Your journey toward authentic discipline and aligned action matters. And by subscribing, you ensure you will not miss the insights and support that can help you continue growing. Click that subscribe button now and let us walk this path of wisdom together.